Dinosaurs in the form of flying reptiles were a feature of Welsh life until surprisingly recent times. As late as the beginning of the present century, elderly folk at Penllyn in Glamorgan used to tell of a colony of winged serpents that lived in the woods around Penllyn Castle. As Mary Trevelyan tells us, the woods around Penllyn Castle, Glamorgan, had the reputation of being frequented by winged serpents, and these were the terror of old and young alike. An aged inhabitant of Penllyn, who died a few years ago, said that in his boyhood the winged serpents were described as very beautiful. He said it was no old story invented to frighten children, but a real fact. His father and uncle had killed some of them, for they were as bad as foxes for poultry. The old man attributed the extinction of the winged serpents to the fact that they were terrors in the farmyards and coverts. This is a pteranodon, an example of one. And by the way, not all of them were huge with big long wings. And in Beowulf, it describes two different kinds. One which had massive, huge wings, which we know existed from fossils, 30 foot and more wingspan. But there's another kind of winged serpent that was smaller, but it was just as much a pest. Not just in Beowulf, but in England and to the North American Indians and Central American Indians, etc.
Interesting, there's a Scandinavian king called Beowulf, and there's a very famous poem about his exploits. And if you read about his description of this big beast that he killed because it was terrorizing the villagers, it's a very accurate description of a Tyrannosaurus rex.
Most people say Beowulf is entirely mythical because there's all these monsters in it. But if you read Beowulf, the poem, it doesn't say fairies and magic elves. It's talking about the Grendel. It's talking about a bipedal monster with giant mouth and big teeth that ate people, just like we might imagine a pteropod dinosaur might do.
In the Agat National Park in Nebraska, there are these structures in the side of the rocks called Devil's Corkscrews. And for years, scientists thought that the plants or some sort of plant created these spiral structures that descend from the surface down about 6 feet. But it was not until they started excavating them that they found these little fossils of beavers at the bottom of them, and they found out that these beavers made these wild corkscrew lodges in the rock. And evolutionary timelines would put this beaver to be extinct about 30 million years ago. But the problem with that is that American Indians know full well what those corkscrews were. And if you would have asked a Lakota Indian, they would have told you they were beaver lodges.
My point with Haas Eagle is the Maoris tell a legend about a giant eagle. And it's easy for us to say, oh, giant eagle, pff, whatever. But it's been verified and it's published. It's the real deal. It was a giant eagle. So if they were right about the giant eagle, then perhaps peoples have been telling the truth in their legends of other creatures too.
Most people today accept that dinosaurs have become extinct, and even creationists who look at the accounts of apparent recent human dinosaurial contact would say, look, it does seem that dinosaurs are extinct. However, there are some tantalising accounts of sightings in very recent decades from various places around the world. In the Congo, for example, the local people there talk of a creature they call Mokele Mbembe. And when Westerners have gone in with drawings of African creatures and dinosaur handbooks, and they've pointed to pictures of, say, the hippopotamus or the rhino, the people have said, no, that's not Mokele Mbembe. And when shown a picture of a sauropod dinosaur in a dinosaur handbook, they've pointed to something like a small sauropod dinosaur. Another example comes to mind, the Lake Murray region of Papua New Guinea. There were people there out in a canoe, and as they looked under their canoe, they saw a large creature swim under the canoe that had what looked like triangular plates extending down its back and all the way down its long tail. And the people speak there of large nesting sites adjacent to the water's edge, which have been clearly left by a large creature.
If you only had one or two stories that sounded a bit similar to dinosaurs, you could see it as just a coincidence. But when you have this universal theme right across the globe, many different continents, many different cultures, and over a vast span of human history, then there's probably going to have to be some universal core truth there. In fact, the late Dr. Carl Sagan, one of the most well-known of all the world's evolutionists, took it so seriously that he actually wrote a book called The Dragons of Eden to try and answer this question as to how come there are so many different stories of dragons that are very similar to the dinosaurs when no one's ever seen a dinosaur. And the answer he came up with in his book was essentially that, well, we evolved from reptiles, so part of our brain is a sort of a leftover of when we lived in the age of the reptiles, and so dragon legends are really, if you like, inherited memories from the age of reptiles. Now, there was an embarrassed silence from many of his evolutionary colleagues because, of course, there's no scientific credibility to the idea that memories are inherited. You know, that you might remember what some ancestor did when he was serving Cleopatra or something like that. But the importance of that little account was that one of the world's leading evolutionists took this issue so seriously that he tried to explain it, even though he didn't do a very good job. A much better explanation is that the Bible is right, that man and dinosaur did live together, and what we see are the somewhat corrupted legends, somewhat corrupted stories of a time when people and dinosaurs did really know each other.
Some people saw Danny coming. He was huge with scales and a long tail. They ran away screaming, "Dragon, dragon, run for your lives!" Danny yelled, "Come back!" But it just sounded like, "Roar!" This made everyone run faster. Stories about Danny's huge teeth and claws soon spread across the land.
If these really are stories based on memory, that means that at one point in time, man did see dinosaurs.
In National Bridges National Monument, Utah, there's actually some carvings, petroglyphs, done by the Indians that even an evolutionist in an evolutionary textbook says looks like a sauropod dinosaur. And we've actually had a team go out there, they've seen it, photographed it, did a wax cloth impression of it, and it just looks like a sauropod dinosaur. But of course the evolutionists would say, well, no, it must be some mythical animal. Why? Because dinosaurs didn't live with people. Well, how do you know that? And so to me, that sort of evidence, when you look at your dragon legends, many of the descriptions of those dragons actually fit nicely what we would call dinosaurs. And many of your dragon carvings, for instance, that you see, dragon paintings around the world, they look like some of the dinosaurs that we would understand existed from the fossil record.
The exact date was 1186 AD. And it's a stone temple. It's in the Angkor Wat temple complex around Cambodia. And in a jungle area.
There's a number of stone carvings of things that are familiar to us today, along with Hindu and Buddhist mythology. And very distinctively, there's one that looks very much like a stegosaur, as reconstructed from fossils by scientists. And the question becomes, how did the people who carved that stone 800 years ago have carved so beautifully a stegosaur without having had any knowledge about what's in today's encyclopedias? And the clear conclusion is they were familiar with those creatures because they were alive at the same time.
Unless it was living, how could they get its anatomy correct? They had to see it in order to reproduce it correctly. And that's just one of over 80 instances around the world in every single continent where it's been found that humans and dinosaurs have coexisted because the humans have reproduced dinosaurs in one art form or another.
There's a cathedral in the UK, Carlisle Cathedral, which has been there a very long time. And one of the bishops buried there 600 years ago has, on the brass trimmings around his tomb, a number of engravings of animals, many of which are familiar to us today, but there's also some that look very much like sauropod dinosaurs. In fact, any 21st century child would immediately recognise them as being sauropod dinosaurs. And so when we think about the evolutionary view that says dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago, and then we look at these sauropod dinosaur engravings on this 600-year-old tomb, how did they get there?
The oldest artifact that we have, period, is an Egyptian slate that commemorates an Egyptian king. And Hierakonpolis slate is one of the names given to this artifact. And on one side it shows him grasping the head of his recently defeated foe and about to chop the head off. So it's